Rose and Greg couldn't figure it out at themselves at first, their German Shepherd Max did not let their baby walk by himself. Every time their little baby named Joe wanted to walk, the German Shepherd put his head on Joe's back. When they went to see a doctor, he made a strange discovery. He called the police immediately. But what was wrong with Joe, and why did the police get involved? For almost a year now, Rose and Greg are the proud parents of their son, Jake. Both Rose and Greg had the desire to become parents, and after they had been together for a while, they decided to try to get pregnant. But that didn't exactly go as planned. Rose struggled to get pregnant. They had tried for almost 2 years now without success. Rose and Greg started to panic a bit. What if it wasn't meant to be for them? Should they consider other options? Then Rose decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to a doctor. Maybe there was something wrong with her body that she did not know about. Rose visited the hospital and the doctor checked everything. After that, she had to go home and wait for the test results. Weeks passed by, but the results weren't there yet. Also, she did not tell her husband Greg about her hospital visit. She started to regret the decision. She knew she had to tell Greg, but would he be mad for not involving him in this? After a lot of hesitation, she had the courage to tell Greg. She started to explain that she was worried that there was something wrong with her body. She was about to cry when she told Greg what she did, but she did not expect Greg's reaction. Greg was surprised by the courage of Rose to tell him this. He admired her even more than he already did. Rose obviously was happy with Greg's reaction. It felt as a big relief that he approved her action. It even led to asking her something from Greg that he maybe would not like. She asked if he could see a doctor as well, just to make sure everything was all right with them. He responded positively and went to the hospital as well. After he finished his medical checks, he had to wait as well. But the call from their doctor came soon after Greg's check. The doctor asked them to come to the hospital immediately. Greg and Rose were worried. This couldn't be good news, right? They were reluctant to go to the hospital, but they had to. When they arrived at the hospital, they luckily had not have to wait long before the doctor arrived. He asked them inside. They sat down and got something to drink. After that, the doctor cut straight to the chase. He told them that they were completely fine and healthy. This was obviously a big relief for both Greg and Rose. But that wasn't all. The doctor had something else. He told them that Rose was actually pregnant. It was still early stages, but they were both really happy that they finally could tell everyone that they were pregnant. Everyone seemed really happy for Rose and Greg, except one family member. Their dog Harry, a German Shepherd, seemed not to be very happy with the pregnancy. It kept on licking, sniffing, and barking towards Rose's pregnant belly. Greg and Rose decided to ignore this at first, as they thought this was Harry, making clear he was also still part of the family. Luckily, Harry seemed to calm down after a few months with his behavior, and after 9 months, their baby boy Joe was born. Rose and Greg were over the moon with the little kid and lived on cloud 9 for the first few weeks, but that changed soon. After the first few months, Joe started to crawl, make some noises other than crying, and was about to walk his first steps. But there was someone who didn't fully agree with the progress Joe was making so quick. Every time Joe wanted to crawl or walk, Harry stopped him. He laid his head on the back of Joe so that he couldn't move. At first, Rose and Greg thought that Harry just wanted to play with Joe. But when the strange behavior dragged on, it got more and more strange for them. Rose got worried. What if Harry would harm their baby in the long run? That still could be the case if he already was so protective or aggressive towards their owners. She got worried and started to Google his behavior, something she regretted as soon as she did it. At first, she found a lot of things that she couldn't relate to. But then she found a forum that exactly described the behavior of Harry towards their baby Joe. And the comments weren't exactly good. She found that it could be two things, which both would not be a good sign. The first option was that Harry himself could be ill and wanted to let it know to their bosses by getting their attention. Rose was shocked by this possible diagnosis and immediately went to Greg to tell him this. He knew they only had to do one thing. Harry was healthy. This was a big relief for Rose and Greg, but at the same time, it scared them really much, as Rose and Greg knew what the forums said about the other possibility. It scared Rose so much that she had to cry right away. The forum said that there could be something wrong with Joe and that Harry was trying to make that clear towards Rose and Greg. Rose decided to call their doctor and tell the story. What the doctor then said made them maybe even more nervous. "You have to come to the hospital immediately so that I can do some checks," said the doctor. Rose and Greg went to the hospital as fast as they could, but not everything worked out the way they wanted. Getting to the hospital was a challenge in itself. Rose and Greg hadn't noticed that it was actually rush hour, so they got stuck in traffic for way longer than they wanted. Maybe Joe needed medical care right away, so they wanted to go as fast as possible to the hospital. But they had a solution. Rose and Greg stressed more and more, but they had a friend with a motorbike that lived nearby. He didn't have the struggles with being stuck in traffic. He really wanted to help Rose and Greg, so he picked Rose, who took Joe with her. Rose and Joe arrived at the hospital. She wanted to see her doctor straight away, but that wasn't possible. There was another emergency that needed help first, which frustrated Rose even more as she was really worried about Joe. She yelled at the hospital employees that she wanted to see her doctor right away. Luckily, the hospital employees knew how to deal with the situation and calmed down both Joe and Rose. The doctor took Rose and Joe with him to his office. First, the doctor asked some questions about the situation. Shortly after, Greg finally arrived after being stuck in traffic. Rose answered every possible question about Joe and Harry's behavior. Then the doctor knew what he had to do. "I have to do some medical examinations," said the doctor. He assured Rose and Greg that it would not be anything dangerous for Joe or something. Rose and Greg agreed right away, and the doctor began his examination. At first, the doctor seemed relaxed about the examinations, and everything looked fine, but the tone of the vet changed when he made an echo. He obviously found something that wasn't okay. Rose and Greg both observed this tone change, but they did not want to interrupt his examination. The doctor did some other tests, made an echo again, but he didn't speak to Rose and Greg for about 5 minutes. This frustrated them. Why didn't he just tell them what was going on? But as soon as he was done, he said something that shocked both Rose and Greg. "I have to call the police, I'm sorry," said the doctor. The doctor shortly left the room to call the police. Rose and Greg were left behind in the office for a short night. The police told the doctor that they would come right away. As soon as the police arrived, they started to ask some questions. First, the doctor had to answer some questions, but the police soon went to Rose and Greg. At first, it were just normal questions, but after that, the police, its tone changed. They started to ask more personal questions about Joe, Rose, and Greg. Rose and Greg answered every questions, but it still didn't make sense to them as to why the police had got involved. But that would soon change. The police officer said, "Sir, you have to come with us. We have to ask you some questions." Greg did not understand this. Why did they want to question him? He did not do anything wrong, but since he had nothing to hide, he decided to answer the questions to avoid more misery. Rose got scared. Greg had to go with the police to another room. But why? Greg wasn't a criminal or something. Rose joined Joe, who also started to cry. They had to wait patiently as the doctor wasn't allowed to say anything until the police got back in the room. In the other room, the police asked really specified details to Greg. If they got pregnant naturally, whether Joe has had medicines in these past months. All of those questions didn't make sense to Greg. Why should they know that information? After he answered the questions, the police asked Greg to come to them with the police station. Greg was shell-shocked. Why should he come with the police? He refused at first, but the police told him that it was urgent and that he needed to come with them. Greg reluctantly agreed with the police to join them. Meanwhile, Rose was really worried. Why did Greg have to come with the police? Luckily, the doctor was able to calm her down with telling that it had nothing to do with Greg himself. Greg obviously got more and more angy. First, he had to answer all of those strange questions, and now he was at the interrogation room of the police. What was going on? He could not figure it out. But then the police finally explained themselves a bit more. All of a sudden, on the other side of the window, there were 5 criminals standing next to each other. Greg had to say whether he recognized someone or not, and to his shock, he saw someone familiar. All Greg could think was how this person ended up in a police cell. It was his pharmacist. But why was he there? As soon as Greg told the police that he recognized his own pharmacist, the police gave him some more context, as it was very strange for Greg to be in this situation. The police told Greg that the doctor found an illegal medical chip inside Joe's body. This chip could regulate the medicines needed. However, this wasn't legal yet. Greg's pharmacist apparently put it in the medicines of Joe, which are on Greg's name. Now everything made sense. But this wasn't the end of it all for Greg, as Rose and Joe were still in the hospital. Was everything going to be fine with his kid? Greg was allowed to leave the police right away after identifying his own pharmacist. The police even drove him back to the hospital. He went to the hospital, hoping that everything was all right with both Rose and Joe. But when he arrived at the hospital, he couldn't find them at the doctor's office anymore. He ran back to the reception, asking where his wife and children were. The nurse told him that they were in the surgery room. Greg panicked. Why were they there? What happened? But he soon found the answer he was looking for. He ran to the surgery room, where Rose was waiting in front of the surgery room. They hugged each other, and after that, Rose started to explain why Joe had to have a surgery. They wanted to remove the medical chip, but Greg wanted to know whether Joe would be all right. Soon after Rose told him that they had to remove the chip, the doctor came out of the surgery room with good news. It was a small procedure which was without any risk, so Joe was healthy. The only thing Rose and Greg had to do was thank another family member. They went back home and thanked their dog Harry straight away, who already felt something that Greg and Rose otherwise never would have seen. After that, they were a happy family again, and Harry let Joe finally walk his first steps.